Hey y'all, it's time for another video from the Mad Matster, and this time about a controversial subject that I've covered before, and that is the band Led Zeppelin. So, about 5 years ago, I did a video about my most overrated guitarist, and Jimmy Page was one of my examples. So, I did proceed to get a barrage of trolls and miserable people who attacked me, including a troll who proceeded to call me names and insult me in, let's just say, a unflattering manner. So I may have said some things about Jimmy Page in a kind of a hyperbolic manner, highlighting what I thought his weaknesses were as a player. The truth is, this is the thing. So I've always liked Led Zeppelin, but as with many bands, I do have kind of a complicated relationship with them. I admire Jimmy Page as a producer and arranger, and even though sometimes the arrange part is unfortunately arranging other people's stuff and claiming it as his own, at least that it was the way it was early on. The most egregious example being Days Confused, which is a folk song from Jake Holmes that up till recently Page had denied even hearing before he wrote it or did his version of it. And finally, I believe it's on a recent live album they did. They said special thanks to Jake Holmes as kind of a part of the agreement or whatever they made with them. So that's something that I really don't like about Led Zeppelin, and especially their early albums were more explicit in that. That said, I'd still think Led Zeppelin were a great band and did a great twist on the blues as well as other styles of music. Unlike the Rolling Stones, though, they did often do interpretations of blues songs, for example, and not give any credit. And for example, Willie Dixon is now on the songwriting credits for Whole Lotta Love, but he had to kind of fight his way to do that and, went to court with Led Zeppelin in the 70s. And you can search the internet for many examples of Zeppelin's plagiarism. Now, some of them, I will admit, are a little bit of a stretch. Like, for example, the recent one with the band Spirit and the band Spirit from the 60s and 70s, and the Stairway to Heaven. I forgot what the song was, what it was called, but there was a Spirit song that they allegedly stole the riff from, but it was kind of a stretch, and it's like Spirit was already going on the reputation Led Zeppelin had as, ripping off a few songs, so they kind of were going after them for a kind of a loosely based upon similar riff. I don't even know if I'm sure Page had heard Spirit, but it was more inspired. The riff, just like with any band, they were inspired by certain riffs or songs. This was not, pure plagiarism. I think "Stairway to Heaven" is an original song. So, but like with "Days Confused," it's a song that the Yardbirds had done with Page, and then he later took the song for Led Zeppelin. So another factor that people had attacked me for drawing attention to Page as far as his weaknesses or his sloppiness playing live. I mean, you watch the I think it's Live Aid 1986, I believe, or 85, and he was pretty horrible by then. And a lot of that had to do with his heroin addiction, and his playing has started to suffer. So as far as his leads, I think he's kind of in the middle ground as far as lead players. I can think of many examples who were his peers, like Beck, Clapton, who I don't like that much, by the way. I probably prefer Jimmy Page's work with Led Zeppelin better than most of Clapton's work with Cream and elsewhere. I do like the Blues Breakers album with John Mayall, which Clapton did. I don't know why I like that one more, but it just has it kind of has a bite that his later stuff didn't have, I guess you'd say. Peter Green, Hendrix, I think Hendrix wasn't as good of a lead player as some of his contemporaries, but he kind of combined rhythm and lead, so it's hard to say where each one begins and ends. So I mean, I think Page was above a lot of his contemporaries as well. He played some classic leads on those early albums and later albums, but like with why I did the video of the most overrated guitarists is because people like Peter Green really don't get their due. So I was just pointing out that fact, and I had to get attacked for that, whatever. But and Page still appears in guitar polls, guitar magazines, online. Greatest guitarists ever, and guys like Green or Uli John Roth or anybody from the 70s or 60s that controversial may have been better in some ways or at some aspect of the instrument get the shaft. So, and that was kind of my point with that video I did so long ago. And I liked nearly all the guitarists I mentioned as far as the overrated guitarists. I just thought they were a little overrated. Except for Zakk Wylde, I'm not really a big fan of him. I liked most of everybody else. So I just think they need to be taken down a notch or two, And then there's also the controversial underage groupie thing with Page, which doesn't really help his reputation. I mean, for sure, it was a different time, and rock stars were known to cavort with young groupies. But locking a 13 or 14-year-old, I don't know how old she was, in a hotel room, I think she was 13. In the case of Lori Maddox, who says she does not regret her liaison with Page to this day, which is interesting, is a far cry from someone like Ted Nugent, who is purportedly with a 16 or 17-year-old. Granted, I think he adopted her to have sex with her, however the story goes. People rarely mention Page or even Bill Wyman when discussing these matters, and it seems like it's to score points against a right-wing blowhard like Ted Nugent, rather than having any real moral qualms about, someone having sex with an underage person. But I digress. Jimmy Page, as far as some of his qualities, he was a magnificent producer, and he revolutionized the way albums are recorded. I know a lot of that was also Eddie Kramer and people he worked with as well. But, Page gets the credit for really being able to get everything together in the studio. And some of those albums just sound incredible to this day. And they have such a loud, booming sound. And, bands copied that just as often as they copied Led Zeppelin's actual music in some ways. So, like, for example, Genesis on Trick of the Tail, the song Squonk, they were trying to get a John Bonham drum sound. I'm sure John Bonham had to do with that too, but a lot of it was Page really getting everything together in the studio. So, I mean, it's a little wonder that rappers still sample Led Zeppelin. People still count them as influences, and they have influenced countless musicians and bands, including me in some ways. But I still don't think that being critical of a band should be conflated with attacking them as a totality or hating them, despite what some trolls on YouTube who have nothing better to do with their lives than post hateful comments on YouTube think. So that's kind of why I did this video, is to kind of clear the air about what I think about Led Zeppelin. I'm somewhat in the middle about them. I do like some of their music a lot. I, listen to them sometimes. I'm sick of all the songs on classic rock radio that get overplayed, but at the same time, it's better than a lot of the shit that's around today. So it's kind of a thing with that. But I thought I'd do this video just to talk about that. And and that troll hasn't really bothered me much lately, but it's like, the whole thing was Richie Blackmore is better. I think I said that in the Jimmy Page video, or the most overrated guitarist video. The thing is they're apples and oranges. They're different styles of music in a lot of ways. I think Blackmore was a better lead player at one time than Page was. I think Blackmore didn't have as much invested in playing acoustic music and doing stuff like that up until recently with Blackmore's Night. But he didn't. Deep Purple and Rainbow had a little bit more of that, the acoustic stuff, but Deep Purple didn't really have a lot of songs like that Led Zeppelin did acoustically, and didn't have as much of a breadth of that kind of stuff. But he played a lot more. It was a faster player. I prefer Jimmy Page's tone in the later 70s to Richie Blackmore's tone. So that's kind of interesting admission, but it's the truth. I just think Richie Blackmore had this kind of dry, this dry tone that I didn't really go for as far as, well, I'm not that old. I wasn't alive when this was going on, but he had kind of this dry, Richie Blackmore, this kind of dry tone I didn't really like as much as Page, even what he was doing in the late 70s. Early Deep Purple, like in rock, I love Richie Blackmore's tone, but after that, after Rainbow, it just became too dry and too kind of blah a lot of the time. Even though the playing is incredible, I don't like the tone as much. So that's what I have to say about Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin in general. And I wanted to make that video just to kind of clear the air. I do a lot of videos, I've done a lot of videos over the years, and sometimes I change my opinion, sometimes I change my mind. But usually, what happens is I'll say something, outrageous, and then people uh, key into one or two things I said and exaggerate and just like blow them out of proportion. That wasn't what I was saying with my video, but oh well. I thought I'd do this anyways, just to talk about Led Zeppelin and you know, kind of we need more discussion about these matters. I think about some of these things, and the good and the bad needs to be acknowledged, both the good and the bad. And I'm acknowledging that they're a legendary band. So that's all I got to say.